What is your first sign of spring? Is it the daffodils coming up in your yard or the little buds you see in the trees? Mine is the chirping and the singing of the osprey. Last Friday, amid the threatening clouds and raw temperatures, I heard that wonderful sound. They're back! It gave me a great feeling that spring is here. For some reason, I have an affinity for this majestic raptor. I think it's because of what the species went through. The plight of the osprey is an environmental success story, to say the least. It seems that every spring I look up and see more and more ospreys flying around Long Island. There are reasons for this recovery. I decided to dig into those reasons and took a trip up to Ithaca, New York, to Cornell University's Lab of Ornithology. The lab is a world leader in the study, appreciation, and conservation of birds. I figured I'd go right to the best source possible and talk to someone about the osprey.
I'm Charles Eldermeyer. I'm the Bird Cam's project leader here at the Lab of Ornithology. In my role, I do everything from the technical setup of bird cams, the communication planning, all that kind of stuff, as well as reaching out to find new cams to hopefully make people excited about watching birds. Well, the Cornell Lab of Ornithology was founded over 100 years ago, and over that time we've grown from a single person in the Department of Entomology over on campus, who was our founder, Arthur Allen, now to an organization that has around 230 or more people working for it among maybe a dozen different programs. And really our programs span the world at this point, all sort of in service to our mission, which is to interpret and conserve birds and biodiversity through research, education, and citizen science. So it's really ever since the beginning, a combination of both science and involvement in the public, whether via education or direct participation. And that's one thing that really sets us apart from lots of organizations that are out there, is that we, from the start, have been a science and people organization. And I think that's really given us a unique role in today's sort of non-profit landscape when it is focused on birds. So we're standing right outside the lab's visitor center. So there's a visitor center and then a larger space where all the scientists and students and everything are. But we're on the trails just outside that visitor center in Sapsucker Woods. And there's about 3.5 or 4 miles of trails out here. Beautiful sort of upstate mixed forest with a lot of red maple and a nice big pond behind us. So a lot of the native audio that you hear is it's the natural world right around us. You're going to hear red-winged blackbirds. You might hear sapsuckers, as the woods were named after. There's some white-throated sparrows singing today, house finches going off, goldfinches, you name it. It's beautiful. It's spring, and everybody's excited here, even if the weather really isn't keeping up its end of the bargain quite yet. So the osprey, like many large raptors, experienced significant population declines due to DDT. And a very similar thing happened where DDT was causing their eggshells to thin. It was interfering with calcium in their bodies. And so as a result of that, you saw populations of ospreys crash. They also had issues with water. Clean water is needed to support the prey populations. And so what you got was, in the 1970s, the Clean Water Act came through, Clean Air Act came through. These two things, also combining with DDT disappearing from the landscape, wound up resulting in a hugely more beneficial environment for osprey populations to grow.
And that's where we are today. The osprey has rebounded in great numbers and have become a common sight up and down the northeast coast. The fish is its main diet, and to watch an osprey hunt is the picture of concentration and skill, diving into the water to catch its prey. Once captured, the osprey will position the fish head first to make it more aerodynamic until it returns to the nest. Ospreys pair for life, and you will start to see these raptors in early spring and stay until the fall. As a migratory bird, their home in the winter is Florida, the Caribbean, South America, and the Gulf Coast. Ospreys live from 15 to 20 years old on average and can rack up to 160,000 migration miles during its lifespan. Ospreys breed in the north, and they choose its nest according to its location to the water and usually come back to the same nest.
Ospreys have a really complex migration strategy, and birds that are on the coast might migrate differently than birds that are interior. They tend to follow water bodies, but they won't always follow them, so you'll find them migrating down the Mississippi, for example. Many birds will come even from the west and migrate all the way south to the Texas coast or the south coast for the winter and spend their winters basically hunting in the warm lagoons of the Caribbean. But then there are other birds that are going to fly all the way across the Caribbean and winter in places like Venezuela or even further south. And so we're just beginning to piece together what these birds do and where they go. And there's no single story to tell at this point because there's really a lot of complexity, both in terms of probably individuals, like single birds going to different places, and then birds from different regions going to different places. But we're talking often on the order of thousands of miles that these birds migrate, and most of that is done during the day. Another interesting thing about ospreys is they're one of the few raptors that will migrate over large swaths of open water. So most raptors don't enjoy or don't. What you find is that most raptors don't migrate over water because it's not as easy to fly over water because it's so cold. And more often raptors are following mountain ranges, for example, where the sun is heating up heating up the rock on the mountains, and that causes these big thermals that rise, and then they can sort of surf those thermals and not have to do much. Whereas the ospreys, like I said, they'll head out sometimes across the entire Caribbean, and sometimes that doesn't pay off. There's been interesting satellite data from birds that we have satellite tags on, where you can actually see ospreys get caught, let's say, in a late season hurricane, and all of a sudden start going backwards and then disappear off the map. So, migration is a challenging thing for everybody.
Man-made structures are a favorite spot for the ospreys, and you'll often see them on telephone poles, antennas, and nest platforms, as well as in natural environments. The female lays around 3 eggs, and they don't hatch all at once. The older hatchling dominates its younger siblings and often gets most of the food the parents bring. If the food is abundant, all the chicks receive the proper amount of food and they will live in relative harmony.
Many birds return to the same nest if they are successful, and ospreys are no different. Generally speaking, if they've been successful in a nest and if the nest is still there, it's much easier to refurbish a nest than it is to go and create a brand new one. And you'll see this through many, especially big species that invest a lot of time and energy in building a nest. They'll come back to those nests. However, if they fail, so meaning if they're not successful in raising their young to the point where they can fly away, sometimes that's enough to cause them to want to create a new nest somewhere else, almost like cleaning the slate, trying again somewhere new. But generally speaking, even that sometimes isn't enough to dissuade them from a good nest site.
Since the internet began, people have taken advantage of the overall reach and power it has. That includes the setting up of and the use of bird cameras. Charles Eldermeyer talks about bird cams and their importance.
Well, our bird cams project started about 5 years ago now, and over that time we've grown from just a couple cameras to sort of a rotating cast of around a dozen or so cameras. And they're not all often active at the same time. So we have birds that are breeding in the spring, we have birds that might be breeding in the fall or the winter that are in a different part of the country or the world. Bird cams in general are a really important part of the landscape now that people have to learn about the world around them. And how they're different from your typical documentary or National Geographic Channel, that kind of thing, is that they're unfiltered, they're uncurated, they're unscripted. Instead, what you get is literally just like opening a window in your house, looking out that window and seeing what happens. And because of that, it's a stark reminder of what's happening in the world. Good things happen, bad things happen, things that pull at your heart happen. And so from the point of view of being, let's say, a scientist who's interested in the environment, that's me, my job here at the lab is really to try and get more people interested in birds. And really, in our bird cams project here, that's what it's all about. It's making people aware of birds. And many people come to these cameras never having watched birds before and fall in love. And while I can stand here and like stare straight in the camera and say, birds are important, you should care about them, it's totally different when someone experiences like an emotional experience that changes the way they feel about something. And that's what these bird cams have the power to do. So from an environmental sort of awareness perspective, that's how they're important. But they also can serve a real important role in science. So we have cameras, for example, on endangered California condors. And these cameras are used to more carefully track how the young are growing to ensure that they're not interrupted more than they need to sort of monitor them. But if anything does go wrong, biologists can respond really, really quickly. And this was sort of a novel approach that the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service used to reduce sort of the impact of them needing to monitor these populations very closely. We can use it to learn a lot more about the basic biology of birds, because instead of sort of sampling what's happening and trying to paint a picture like a dot-to-dot picture, that's the way most science is done, because we can't just sit there and watch everything that happens. So these cameras have the power to actually fill in that picture, to bring color and life to it by giving you a census, really, of every single piece of food that's brought to that nest, every time an incubation shift is made between a male and a female, those kinds of things. And then when you have lots of these cameras on the web, which we do now, in the case of ospreys, there might be anywhere from 40 to 80 cameras over the course of a year that are live on the internet. If we can start banding those observations together, what we get is an unparalleled look at what is happening on a nest-by-nest basis, but also across an entire region or even the world, what is happening with ospreys. And that's something that's never existed before in the world of science. And the novel part of that, too, is that often it's the audience that's contributing that information. It's the participants, it's the viewers who are saying, this kind of fish got brought, or somebody got off the nest here, or an egg was hatching now. And so you have this crowdsourced global project capacity. And now, hopefully, over the next 5 years, you're going to see that change the way we learn about things.
All of the images you have been seeing from the nest perspective was given to us by the Osprey Zone. Paul Henry started this webcam because of his love for the osprey.
I've always been just kind of fascinated with ospreys because of their relationship to the sea and the fishing and my love for the ocean. And, being around these parts for all these years and seeing all these ospreys coming and going from their nests, nobody really had a clue what was going on inside the nests until people started putting these cameras up. We've had 500 and 600 simultaneous users and 30,000 visitors a day come to our site. So this is kind of where it all happens here. We have our streaming server, which is essentially sending the signal from the camera to our server. And then here we have a monitor. Right now we're monitoring highlights from last year, actually, when the ospreys were first just discovering this nest and learning how to fly as well. And then we're also very involved in editing our footage. We're collecting 24/7 all the footage from the Osprey Cam, saving some 40 gigabytes of data every day, which we are compiling and turning into highlights, as well as putting together to do a little documentary and working on various different projects with this. For instance, we've had professors calling us who are interested in the specifics of the osprey feeding, and they want to go through all our footage and see what type of fish and how many fish are being collected every day, just to collect data to learn more about the ospreys. We started realizing that there was really something quite enticing here, that we're drawing people. The following that we've collected watching our site religiously every day is very impressive, but also it was very educational, because people are starting to ask questions. Some of the people have answers to some of the more interesting questions about why they do things. There's a lot of professors, people with knowledge, expertise in ospreys, who have come forth and shared information with us, and it's been really quite an experience. There's also been a lot of drama. We've had several situations that evoked a lot of emotions from our viewership that we've had to address. One of the more interesting ones has been the rescue, where one of the ospreys got entangled in some fishing line, and we were able to coordinate the electric company that had a big machine that could get up there. The osprey nest is 85 feet tall, and we were able to coordinate a rescue attempt based on getting up to the nest, and also with the help of the wildlife rescue people in Hampton Bays, who were able to send a professional osprey handler to come and deal with the fishing line entangled on the osprey's foot.
Here is a segment that Paul Henry produced documenting that event.
When I started live streaming this nest, I had no idea the kind of reactions that we would be getting from our viewers. There's a certain intrinsic love for these birds, and it's really been, I think, expressed so well in the commentary of our website. You know, we always thought it was really cool and really interesting, and it was fascinating and kind of addicting, but it's amazing how bonded people have become to these birds. It's like family, and this is really what's amazing about the experience of running this site and being able to offer this to the public. But there's been a lot of drama in the nest. On Thursday morning, we started receiving emails, phone calls, messages, comments on our website that one of the ospreys had become tangled in the fishing line. We consulted some of the osprey experts that we had contacted previously, and they all agreed that this was caused by a man-made object and that we should intervene and try to save the osprey. We started making a lot of calls to a lot of different people. We called other osprey people asking advice. We reached out everywhere we could to try to figure out what our best options were. We were fortunate enough to speak to PSEG, our local electric company. They sent a foreman down to make sure that the osprey nest was accessible with their equipment. And without hesitation, they just stepped up to the plate and came to the rescue of these ospreys. So now we're faced with the problem of, once we get up to the top of the tower to the nest, what do we do? Obviously, we needed somebody who's experienced and trained to be able to help this situation.
I'm a volunteer with the Evelyn Alexander Wildlife Rescue Center in Hampton Bays. This is probably my fourth osprey. I've done great horned owl, I've done red-tailed hawk, I've done cormorant, all sorts of other birds. So this is the fourth one in the osprey family. I didn't have anything going on today because I'm a public school teacher, so I had the day off. So my wife and I decided to come out this way and locate where the osprey nest was, and go out there, and they were going to try to locate someone to get me up in a truck or a ladder or something like that to try to get this off the leg of the osprey.
Meanwhile, the sky is turning black, and there's a storm brewing, and there's a lot of concern. We're feeling raindrops, and we're not sure if the wind is going to blow and whether we're going to be able to get up and perform this rescue. When they got back to the nest, nobody wasted any time. They needed to just check things out, and they sent the bucket up empty for the first pass just to make sure that everything worked before they put any people in it. And as they sent the bucket up, the mother osprey started buzzing the bucket, and everybody was thinking, uh-oh, is she going to be coming after our men when we go up there?
It was a little bit nerve-wracking, but I'm a former Air Force pilot, retired, so I'm used to heights, and I'm used to flying around in planes with the doors and the windows open and things like that. So it wasn't a really big deal. They offered me a raincoat to kind of protect my arms so I wouldn't get bitten. They gave me another different pair of gloves and a helmet to wear on my head as a safety thing, as well as putting a safety harness on me that's strapped to the bucket. I was actually amazed at how close that the PSEG guys got us to the nest, and it was so easy. They were professional about moving it right up to the side of the nest. The mother or the father, I'm not sure which one it was dive bombing us, so we kind of keep an eye up there. But well, the PSEG operator, he had the pole, and he was trying to protect us from the other osprey coming along, and he was not comfortable with it. None of the PSEG guys like working around ospreys. So, but at one point his helmet came off because he was ducking the bird.
When they got to the nest, the first thing that was done, gratefully so, was that the lens was clean, crystal clear, which enabled us to get all this wonderful footage of the rescue.
First thing I did was I took a blanket that I brought up and I covered them with the blanket, and that usually calms them down because they kind of think, oh, I'm hidden, I'm going to be fine here. As soon as you put the blanket on top, well, the one bird on the right bit the blanket, so he was defending himself a little bit. But they calmed down, they stopped moving, they didn't move much at all. The one on the left never moved at all. He just froze the whole time. The first one that I came to on the right actually had another cord that was kind of close to it, and it potentially could have gotten tangled, so I removed that and put it in the bucket. I checked that one out to make sure that there was nothing else entangling that one, and that one was fine. So then I went to the one on the left, and sure enough, the right leg of the one on the left had the fishing line wrapped around that. I was surprised the volume of tanglement. There was a lot of fishing line there. I'm surprised that the mother and the father brought that up there, but there was quite a bit there, and it potentially could have done a lot of damage to them.
And then Jim started to clean the osprey nest. He took all the plastic bags that he could. He took a windshield wiper off the nest. He took all the debris that had been brought up over the past month, and he patted the ospreys goodbye. As the bucket truck left the nest, he waved goodbye to the ospreys, his newfound friends. As this is happening, everybody on the ground is cheering and all excited and happy. It was just really a joyous moment for everybody. We all felt so wonderful that we were able to perform this rescue without any hitches, and it was very emotional for everybody, and there's nothing like a happy ending.
Maybe 2 or 3 years ago, Paul got in touch with me saying that he had a camera on an osprey nest. And at the time, we had already had 2 osprey cameras that we were running, and we were actually looking to move back to just 1 osprey camera because, as I said, we're pretty almost overtaxed during the northern temperate breeding season. There's just so many birds and so little time and just not enough people. You know, we'd check in on the camera from time to time and see how things were going. And maybe midway through last season, Paul reached out to us because there was a situation unfolding on cam, and he had known we had dealt with situations like this in the past. And it really involved one of those challenging things that you can have happen on cam, sort of the dark side to nature, and that is sometimes things die or are hurt on cam, because that's what happens in nature. And so he got in touch with us because there was a situation like that happening at the Osprey Zone nest, and asked us for guidance on how we would communicate and also what our approach was in these situations. And generally speaking, we don't intervene at all at nests. We put up a camera and then we let it run because we really feel like people seeing the truth of what happens in nature is part of understanding what is happening in nature, but also gaining an even stronger appreciation for the challenges and the struggles that birds overcome really on a daily basis. When you watch a bird get covered by snow in a snowstorm like our hawks did the other day in a mid-April 4-inch dump of snow, let the snow accumulate on their backs and then just stand up, shake it off, and go right back to incubating eggs, I think that resonates with people in a different way than if we had just hidden anything that was, maybe slightly scary from view. And in the case of especially raptors, water birds like herons and egrets, they have eggs that are laid often 1, 2, possibly 3 days apart from one another, and those eggs then hatch out 1, 2, or 3 or more days apart from each other, such that you can have an egg that hatched out on one day, and the last egg that was laid, let's say if they had 3 eggs, might be 3 or 4 days or more younger. So that older chick has a big advantage over those younger ones. It's bigger, it can get to the food first that the adults are feeding, and the adults are often going to feed that chick first because their job is to make sure something survives. And you can think of laying those eggs as, if it's a great year, all these chicks are going to survive. If it's not a great year, we're going to do our best to make sure something survives. And that's a really important part of their biology because, as we were just talking about, ospreys are spreading across the landscape right now, at least here in central New York, and they can go out, find a place they want to put a nest, let's say, but they don't necessarily know what the fish are going to be like in the middle of June until they've spent a June there. So having some flexibility to how you breed, having 3 eggs, and if it's a great spot, you're pulling off 3 kids, and if it's a bad spot, maybe you can still pull off 1, but you're still producing something. That's an important part of their biology. And as I said, lots of species have sort of that insurance policy where, because they're staggered, the one that's laid first typically has an advantage and has the greatest chance of survival. It's just a natural part of the biology of these animals. And we've taken the stand that, we don't intervene in natural processes. It's not, for us, in a species that's not being managed. It's not an endangered species. There's no recovery plan that requires that level of intervention. It's what happens if you're an osprey. We chimed in the forums just to share some of those views about the biology of it, about it being a part of their natural history, and about that it's an important part of their natural history, and then shared what our approach has been to natural history, with the caveat that if something is endangering a chick or an adult in the nest, and that something is coming from a human, let's say fishing line wrapped around a leg, or a fishing hook, or something like that, then the idea of intervention is a more understandable one. There's an obvious culprit for this injury that you could make the case shouldn't be there. And in those situations, it's still not a done deal that intervention is the right choice. You could go up there, something else could go wrong. Anytime you interact with a wild animal, something can go wrong. And so those kinds of decisions would only be taken in consultation with other scientists, with wildlife rehabbers, with any experts needed, and of course the authorities who would be able to provide permits to do that. But it's not as simple as people think to intervene, and there's always a risk.
And when you see what's going on in the nest and you get this very raw picture into nature, I think any normal person is going to be incredibly attracted to that information, to that window. It's just a fascinating world that when people discover, usually they're very, very attracted to. Not only do people relate, I think, to the Ospreys, but they love the fact that this family is struggling with nature and winning.